So here's my persuasive speech. Today I'm going to tell you why slavery should be taught in schools better than it is now within the United States. The history of slavery is a topic many people do not want to bring up. This topic is not told in the raw and truthful way like it should be. School systems try not to sugarcoat how this topic is taught and how this topic is truly understood. What happened during and after slavery was not shown in the public eye like it should have been. Teaching slavery in the school system has never been an easy thing to teach. This history of slavery should be taught in schools with the same curriculum and the same funding so that the whole country understands the atrocities that were committed at that time. The history of slavery should be a speech all on its own. This speech is only 6 minutes long, so I'm just going to give a brief thing about it. So everybody knows that slaves were taken from Africa and they were enslaved, and they were taken from their homes they were basically kidnapped. What I'm trying to get at, they were basically kidnapped. So they were forced to work, they were forced to do hard labor, and they were given a master. This master, most of them were very mean, and slaves were usually beaten, slaves were usually, if they did something wrong, if they tried to run away, limbs would be taken off. So very rarely there would be a master that was nice to them. So then slaves would harvest crops, and most of the time the crop of choice was cotton, but rice, tobacco, and sugar were also harvested. Once cotton was produced, it was shipped to the Industrial Revolution, which started up. So once the Industrial Revolution started up and cotton was brought to there, factories would produce cotton, would produce cloth from the cotton. So once this cloth was made, it was bought, and the cycle continued for a long time with slaves producing the cotton being made into cloth, and cloth being bought in the store. So it started a huge thing. And now I'm going to talk about why slavery should be taught better in schools all around the country. Most students, when they go into higher education, they will be able to understand slavery more if it is taught at a younger age. Most students actually do go into secondary education and college level education not knowing about history or slavery, or if they do know some, it's not as much as what they should know. Teachers have to start from the beginning so that they know that their students are getting the proper information. This then leads to less being taught in the classroom, or it could also lead to professors and teachers speeding along the subject being taught, so there's less being taught, or there isn't enough critical thinking happening so that students understand what they need to understand. And it also would take out the white thinking of things. So the white thinking of things is that slaves were enslaved, all the Northerners were great people, all the Southerners were bad people, and the South were the ones that enslaved them. They wanted them all to be slaves, which is not true. And textbooks nowadays are really going to that type of saying that the North didn't want slaves and the South wanted slaves. Actually, in the South, there were a lot of people not wanting slaves. They would buy slaves just to give them a better life, to free them. And there were people up north that wanted slaves. They wanted their crops to be harvested by slaves. But most of the time, the slaves in the North were free and people up there did not want them. And slaves in the South were not free and people wanted slaves in the South. So with all this, there's also a bad thing for this being taught in schools. One, children, they're hard to teach this type of gruesome things, and it is hard for people to want to teach children this type of scary thing. Sorry. So teachers also might not understand the topic themselves, and they don't want to teach it because they don't know it, and they don't want to teach the children wrongly, or they are teaching it wrongly, so students aren't understanding it. And like I said, it's a gruesome thing. Slaves were beaten, slaves were killed, and they were people. And the also con for teaching slavery in schools is funding has a lot to do with it. Funding usually gets from local communities. So if a local community doesn't want that thing to be taught to their children, they are not going to teach it to their children. And same thing goes for state. If the state doesn't see that as a priority, it's not going to be taught in the school system. And the school wants its money, so it will say, we're not gonna talk about that much because of that. So, in conclusion, even though it is slow, the talk and the effects are still there today. The history of slavery should be taught in all schools with the same curriculum and funding so that the whole country fully understands the atrocities that were committed at that time. The curriculum needs to change so students and teachers understand what happened. It is a subject that is hard to teach and no one wants to teach it, but it needs to be taught. It has to be taught. It needs to be taught so children know what happened, adults know what happened. When someone says, oh, this is a hard thing to talk about, we understand that. Oh, this is a hard thing to talk about because my family went through it. There is no good answer on how to teach slavery to students, but students need to be able to understand what happened. They need to know that, yes, the United States is ashamed of it, but the United States is not covering it up. We are showing our past. We are showing that it was a wrong thing. And just because all this happened doesn't mean that they deserved to be treated that way. Teaching the history of African American slaves is very important for younger generations to understand because we cannot take back the past, but the viewpoint can change towards it. Thank you.